Hey folks, JOC here with your Ranting Politics headline updates. We've got a packed show today with some absolutely wild stories that you won't want to miss. Coming up, Trump makes waves by signing his promised No Men in Women's Sports executive order, while CBS finds itself in hot water over some creative editing in their Kamala Harris interview. We'll also dive into how Elon Musk just saved taxpayers millions by axing those cushy Politico contracts. Plus, protesters hit the streets nationwide as the administration's policies ruffle more than a few feathers, and Anheuser-Busch decides domestic beer isn't American enough anymore. Stick around. This is going to be an interesting ride. In a move that's got both supporters and critics fired up, President Trump just dropped what might be his most controversial executive order yet. On National Girls and Women in Sports Day of all days, he signed the No Men in Women's Sports order, effectively putting the kibosh on transgender athletes competing in women's sports. Now, Trump being Trump, he kept it pretty straightforward, saying, "This doesn't have to be long, it's all about common sense." He declared that women's sports will be only for women, and announced that the war on women's sports is over. Pretty bold statements, if you ask me. The signing ceremony wasn't just your typical White House photo op either. Trump packed the East Room with some heavy hitters from the sports world, including Riley Gaines and several other independent women ambassadors who've been vocal about this issue. Gaines, who you might remember from that controversial NCAA championship situation with Leah Thomas, was front and center. The executive order's got some serious muscle behind it. According to White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, it's designed to defend the safety of athletes, protect competitive integrity, and uphold the promise of Title IX. They're really leaning into this as a restoration of what they call common sense policies. But here's where it gets interesting, folks. The administration isn't stopping with just the executive order. They're pushing Congress to pass the Protection of Women and Girls Sports Act, which the House already gave the thumbs up to last month. If that goes through, we're looking at a nationwide rule that would make sure student athletes compete on teams matching their birth gender. According to Fox News reporting, supporters like Mark Trammell from the Center for American Liberty are calling this a major victory for women and girls. But let's be real. This is just the beginning of what's sure to be a lengthy legal and social battle over the future of women's sports in America. Looking at the bigger picture, this is classic Trump. Taking a controversial issue and tackling it head-on with an executive order that's sure to have people talking for months to come. Whether you're cheering or jeering, one thing's for sure. The debate over transgender athletes in sports isn't going away anytime soon. Well, folks, we've got a media storm brewing over at CBS, and it's all about what ended up on the cutting room floor. The network's facing some serious heat after releasing the unedited version of Vice President Kamala Harris's recent 60 Minutes interview. And let me tell you, the differences are raising more than a few eyebrows. Get this. What started as a 179-word response about the Israel situation got whittled down to just 20 words in the final broadcast. The FCC's now involved, investigating whether CBS crossed a line between standard editing and potential election interference. And Trump? He's not sitting this one out. He slapped the network with a whopping $10 billion lawsuit. The unedited footage shows Harris giving some pretty meandering responses, particularly about the Gaza situation. In one instance, a lengthy 140-word answer about October 7th got trimmed down to a much snappier 56-word version. Even a CBS insider admitted the edits did Harris a lot of favors in making her appear more coherent. But here's where it gets really interesting. This controversy could throw a major wrench in Paramount's $8 billion merger with Skydance. The FCC's scheduled public hearings for March, which might push back that merger timeline. And while Trump and CBS are reportedly having some very preliminary settlement talks, network staff aren't too happy about the possibility of paying up. FCC Chair Brendan Carr, a Trump appointee, is taking this seriously enough to schedule public hearings after complaints from the Center for American Rights. While CBS is defending their edits as standard practice for time, space, or clarity, this whole situation is putting a spotlight on the fine line between editorial discretion and potential news manipulation. Keep in mind, We're talking about a broadcast network that needs FCC licenses to operate, so the stakes here are pretty high. Whether this turns out to be much ado about nothing or a genuine case of media manipulation, it's definitely got the attention of both Washington and Wall Street. Breaking news on the federal spending front. It looks like Politico's golden goose of government contracts is getting cooked. The White House just announced they're pulling the plug on a hefty $8.4 million worth of federal agency subscriptions to the news outlet, and you can thank or blame Elon Musk for shining a spotlight on this one. Musk, who's heading up Trump's new Department of Government Efficiency initiative, or DOGE as the cool kids are calling it, fired off a shot on X, calling these subscriptions a flat-out waste of taxpayer money. And apparently the White House agreed faster than you can say budget cut. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt didn't mince words when she confirmed the news, saying these millions in taxpayer dollars that were essentially subsidizing Politico subscriptions are getting the axe. The administration's using a pretty straightforward litmus test here. Does it serve the American people's interests, and is it worth the taxpayer money? Now, for those wondering what we're actually talking about here, Politico's not just your average news site. We're talking about specialized policy newsletters that have become must-reads for Washington's power players. Think healthcare, energy, you name it. The German media giant Axel Springer thought enough of it to drop a cool $1 billion to buy it back in 2021. But Musk isn't stopping here. He's hinting that more media outlets might want to start tightening their belts, warning that many of them are about to see what he calls a mysterious drop in revenue. Something tells me this might just be the first domino to fall in a larger shakeup of government media spending. The streets of America turned into a sea of protest signs and chanting voices today as thousands gathered across the country to voice their opposition to the Trump administration's recent policy moves. From Philadelphia to Phoenix, and just about everywhere in between, demonstrators made their presence known with a coordinated effort they're calling 50-51. That's 50 protests, 50 states, one day. In Philadelphia, protesters took aim at Project 2025, while state capitals from California to Wisconsin saw crowds gathering despite freezing temperatures in some locations. In Lansing, Michigan, where protesters braved the cold, there was particular concern about Elon Musk's new role in government efficiency. One creative protester even depicted Musk as a puppeteer controlling Trump, a reference to some controversial gestures from Musk's January speech. The demonstrations hit multiple hot-button issues, with immigration taking center stage in several cities. Phoenix protesters chanted, "Deport Elon," and "No hate, no fear, immigrants are welcome here," while Denver's protest coincided with ongoing ICE operations in the area. Meanwhile, down in Alabama, several hundred people rallied against recent LGBTQ+ policy changes, particularly pushing back against both state and federal attempts to legally define sex as only male or female. Things got particularly heated in Des Moines, where anti-Trump protesters crashed a Moms for Liberty event inside the Capitol building. That showdown lasted about 15 minutes before law enforcement stepped in, with 4 protesters leaving in handcuffs. In Minnesota's capital, the atmosphere was more focused on fear than fury, with protesters expressing deep concern about the country's direction. The demonstrations marked the largest coordinated protest effort since Trump's return to office, with organizers using social media to rally supporters under hashtags like #TanteChav Build Their Assistance. And if today's turnout is any indication, it looks like we're seeing the beginning of a new wave of resistance to the administration's agenda. In what might be the most American rebranding effort we've seen this year, Anheuser-Busch's CEO, Brendan Whitworth, is taking a stand against the word domestic when it comes to American beer. The former Marine sent out a passionate letter to distributors and partners, basically saying it's time to drop the D word and embrace American as the go-to term for U.S.-made brews. Whitworth's message reads like a love letter to American industry, pointing out that these beers are crafted by American workers earning American wages, using ingredients from American farmers, and supporting American causes like our military and first responders. He mentioned the word American a whopping 25 times in his letter. Talk about commitment to the cause. The timing of this patriotic pivot is interesting, coming hot on the heels of President Trump's re-election and riding the wave of populist sentiment sweeping the country. Though Anheuser-Busch claims this rebranding discussion started before the election, you can't help but notice how it aligns with the current political climate including Trump's own initiatives like renaming the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. This move comes as Anheuser-Busch continues its rightward shift in marketing strategy following last year's controversial Dylan Mulvaney incident. They've been busy partnering with the UFC, bringing on comedian Shane Gillis, and even getting cozy with Dana White for an upcoming energy drink launch. The real question is whether the industry will actually adopt this change. While Budweiser labels already proudly declare themselves Great American Lager, it remains to be seen if bars, restaurants, and industry reports will drop the term domestic from their vocabularies. For now, Whitworth is betting big that American has more appeal than domestic. And in today's political climate, he might just be right. Well, people, that wraps up another packed episode of Ranting Politics Headline Updates. We've covered Trump's executive order on women's sports, the CBS Harris editing controversy, Musk's crusade against government spending at Politico, nationwide protests, and Anheuser-Busch's very American rebranding effort. My friends, if you're enjoying the insights and the independent ethos we're dishing out here at Ranting Politics, don't be a stranger. Jump into the lively conversation on X, give us a follow at RantingRP, or check us out at rantingpolitics.com, or stop over to our all-new YouTube channel. We're always buzzing about the next big headline and love to see your takes on the fiasco that is politics. And while you've got that phone handy, come on, I know it's in your reach. Do us a solid and tap that like and follow button on your podcast feed. Your support doesn't just boost our reach. It keeps real independent thought in the game against those giant media machines. We're also on all your favorite podcast platforms, from Apple Podcasts to Spotify and now Alexa. Hit that subscribe button for regular updates chock full of unfiltered analysis and all the news that's fit to rant about. This is JOC signing off, and thank you, our loyal listeners, for choosing Ranting Politics Headline Updates. We'll be back soon with the updates you need to navigate these interesting times. Until then, stay tuned, stay informed, and as always, stay free.